special edition of Christine and Guests, where I invite my friends and colleagues from my network across the food and ag industry for an open and lively and informative discussion around some of the cool phenomenons happening in this sector. And I'm truly thrilled today to have the one and only Louisa Burwood-Taylor from AgFunder, who, little fun fact, I've actually never met in person. We've always like had this virtual connection, despite the fact that we are both like, you know, have been in this space working with startups for many years. So Louisa is the head of media and research at AgFunder, which is really the, you know, industry source for news and updates about everything happening in food and ag. If you're not following her on social media, go do that right now. It really is like the constant place to find the news that you need to understand what's happening in innovation and investment in this sector. Louisa, I would love it if you could, you know, introduce yourself, talk a little bit about, you know, how you got into this space, and you know, tell us more about AgFunder too before we dive into the topic today about farm tech investments.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you so much for having me. It is great to have this chat with you. I feel like I've known you for so long. Hopefully next year we'll get to meet. Yeah, exactly. My background, I'm a financial journalist, actually. So I was covering various different financial markets during my career. I started in the very exciting world of structured bonds in the UK.
Riveting.
It wasn't exciting. And then I moved to Hong Kong, which was exciting. And I was covering equity capital markets. I moved to the Financial Times and helped them set up a new publication focused on institutional investment. And so started to look at where big institutions, big pension funds, insurance companies, big corporates, how they were allocating their funds. And while I was doing that, I started to get interested in alternative assets. There was something much more tangible about these. This was like real estate, infrastructure. And when I moved back to the UK for a short while, I got a job at a company called PEI Media, and they were setting up this kind of niche department to look at newer areas of investment. And one of those was agriculture. And that was back in 2013. And as soon as I got into agriculture, I was like, this is where I want to be for a long time now. And initially I was focused on reporting on investment in farmland and kind of agribusiness, private equity. Ag tech was kind of this small piece of it. Yeah, and then in 2015, it was kind of a big breakout year for ag tech, and that's when I knew Rob and Michael from AgFunder since they launched AgFunder similar time that I launched AgriInvestor, the publication, and they invited me to come and join them in 2015, and the rest is history.
The rest is history. What's amazing is actually 2013 is when TFF started too, so we followed similar trajectories, and exactly like you said, it was like, in 2013, it was like ag tech, who the heck wants to get involved there? It was like not a big deal. People, you know, we were kind of like starting with bringing startups and entrepreneurship into this space, but then boom, you know, things took off. And we were just chatting before, you know, we went live here about, it actually started everything with farm tech and from the investment angle, right? Like this big, massive investment in Climate Corp, $1 billion, right? And then things kind of moved more into like the food tech side of things. And now we're back to farm tech. So can you talk a little bit, and why we're here today is because AgFunder has just released this farm tech report kind of talking about trends from 2019 and the investment landscape, which is super interesting, filled with lots of data. You can download it for free on the AgFunder website. But if you can talk a little bit about what you've seen the trajectory being in farm tech, you know, and in the whole food and agri-tech space, you know, over the past few years.
Yeah, absolutely. So we used to purely focus on ag tech, which included farm tech, and then up down the supply chain a little bit into kind of the midstream, and also controversially some food e-commerce. And that food e-commerce, that food delivery part, got quite unwieldy for many years and really contributed a lot to the overall growth of the industry. But a few years ago, well, I mean, I guess it's a couple of years ago that food delivery piece, you know, started to wane a bit. I think there were so many food delivery options out there that it started to become difficult for investors to find interesting bets in that space. I think, you know, you had like a lot of the first movers in the food delivery space were really gathering pace and were becoming more mature, and they you know, were really sucking a lot of the air out of the room. So I think food delivery started to become less popular. But what happened with farm tech is it's just been on this steady trajectory of being able to, oh, are we breaking up?
Is everyone
breaking up
having
for you?
trouble issues?
Oh, yeah, you've definitely frozen for me now.
Our panelists, if you could chime in.
Oh, good. Okay. I think everyone seems to be able to hear clearly.
Oh,
maybe it's at your end, Christine.
wasn't able to hear it, but yeah. Please keep going. Sorry about that.
Shall I just keep going? I hope you can pick up on it. So yeah, so food delivery started to wane a little bit, the funds and the volumes that were going into that. But farm tech has just had this very steady increase in investment over the years. Each year it has carried on and continued to grow, even in you know, a pullback year that there was in venture capital overall, which was last year and the year before. There was a pullback that didn't happen in farm tech. And I think it really speaks to just how this industry has been steadily growing. I'm a bit concerned I'm slightly speaking to myself and Christina's frozen. Let's see if she comes back on. Yeah, I think we're... Is she there? I mean, maybe some of you, are you back?
I think
I can start to answer some panelist questions if we're struggling to get Christine back. Yeah, I think you're back, but you're muted. Thanks, Jana. Okay, Jana's asking me a question. Investment, yeah, in farm tech startups has grown consistently since 2013, 370% to be exact. Why are we seeing such a huge increase? So I think when you're starting from zero, pretty much, you know, the only way is up. So it's a new space. So it's just going to have been continued to grow as more entrepreneurs come into this space. I think that people are starting to realize how important it is that we innovate in the food industry, thinking about environmental concerns, thinking about human health concerns. There's a lot to do to kind of make it more efficient. And so that is why there's been a lot more dollars coming in, a lot more entrepreneurs coming in too. Are you back?
Okay, I'm back.
Great. Well, Jada jumped in and asked me a question.
Yes, great.
So I went ahead with that.
Yes, that's great. Let's hear it. Sorry, I'm listening now. Yes.
No, I was just saying how, you know, farm tech was a new industry. And so there was only one way to go. And so obviously it is fantastic growth to reach, what was the number, 4.7 billion last year for farm tech. But equally, it's, you know, it's to do with entrepreneurs and investors realizing the impact that our food industry has on the world, realizing how inefficient so much of it is, environmentally and otherwise, realizing, you know, the health pandemic related to food. And so I think there's a lot of mission-oriented investors and entrepreneurs out there, but also some that are just pragmatic and see that there are inefficiencies that need to be brought to bear in this industry that have been in other industries, but agriculture was left behind.
And what's interesting to me is that actually a much lower percentage of our population is involved in farming. And we've seen that farm tech innovation has increased. I think it was like 370% that we saw in your report. So how, like, with less people working on farms, living on farms, you know, with fewer people, I should say. Why are we seeing so much interest coming to like helping farming, you know, and are these innovations fit for purpose if people are disconnected from, you know, growing themselves?
That's a really interesting way of thinking about it. I mean, that's obviously true for the developed world, that there's fewer people involved in farming. But that's part of the problem. That's part of the reason why we need innovation, right? So you have this older population, this older generation in the developed world that are doing the farming, and their, you know, sons and daughters don't particularly want to go back to the farm. And so that transitional phase is going to be something that's, you know, a challenge for sure. And so arguably that's an argument for the need for technology. And now we're seeing with COVID, you know, limitations with labor, which were already a problem, especially on like places like the West Coast, is a real thing now. So looking to automation and robotics and other types of mechanization is going to be hugely important.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what you know, at TFF we've been seeing is like agriculture has been the least digitized industry. I think there was a McKinsey report that came out a few years ago that basically was like, this is the least digitized industry. So you saw like innovators, especially from the next generations coming in who, you know, are digital natives and saying, how can we bring digital tech and, you know, hardware solutions and biotech solutions into this space and kind of like rethinking farming as we know it. But one of the things we're really espousing in Thought for Food is that it's super important to get out there and talk to growers, because a large part of that gap from digitization has to do with the fact that, you know, there is like this legacy of like how we've grown, what we're doing, etc. And I think when we're talking specifically in the space of precision agriculture, right, which is like that first farm tech investment that we mentioned at the outset of the call around Climate Corp, the value prop for growers was a little bit like questionable. It's like, you know, why now should I be like, you know, looking at like this data and paying for it, etc. And so that's been kind of interesting to see, is like farm tech has come in, but sometimes the like business model around it or the value proposition is still being determined. The investment's coming, we're seeing the need for it, but how do you convince growers about some of these solutions? And I think that's where there's some interesting new types of conversations happening in the wake of COVID, because now it's like front and center, the need for automation and digitization, because there's this like real problem of lack of labor or, you know, supply chains that are disrupted, and all of these kinds of problems have really come to the fore for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's good, I mean, I don't know if you can say anything's good about this situation, but there, you know, that you were right about those conversations between entrepreneurs and farmers. There was a time where there was a mismatch there. And there was that first wave of entrepreneurs knocking on the door of the farmers and saying, "Here, you want this tool?" And
Yeah,
you know, a lot of
it,
farmers
right?
you were very excited and were spending time testing a lot of these. Then they got burned. You know, they don't have a huge amount of time. They're not big risk takers necessarily. You know, to devote a certain number of acres to testing a new technology. And I think there's been you know, some fatigue, particularly over here in the US. Where I'm based. So but I think we've kind of come out of that wave, and the entrepreneurs that are doing really well have really definitely engaged much more with those farmers. And so luckily now, as we're tackling these COVID issues, I'm hopeful that a lot of the startups that can have some real innovation for them are going to be suitable and farmer backed.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I want to get to Kim's questions about valuations, but really quickly before I do, I want to just talk about some of the mega trends that you're seeing. So, you know, when I went through the report, it was fascinating to see that urban agriculture or vertical farming is like back. I think there was like a time a couple of years ago where people were like, okay, this is hype, you know, and now it's like actually gotten significant investment. Some of the big name companies like Plenty and Arrow Farms. But you're also seeing, like, because of COVID, there's renewed interest globally in local supply chains, which can be, you know, served by urban farming and vertical farming. So I'd love to hear a little bit like about some of those types of players and what you're seeing, you know, as kind of emerging trends, not just the precision ag side of things, but like what other kind of exciting companies are coming with farm tech.
Yeah, so vertical farming is a funny one. You know, a few years ago, I slightly rolled my eyes when people would just instantly want to talk about vertical farming. All the articles on our website about vertical farming were destined to be the best read of the week. But it was still this very small niche. I think people didn't realize how like a fledgling industry it really was. People were very excited. It's kind of sci-fi. It's kind of cool. This idea you can grow your food in a box. And there was definitely some early growing pains. And what's really interesting, I think, is we've seen in the last year or so, these companies are really emerging out of those growing pains. And a lot of it is around the economics, you know, the unit economics, the cost of energy, the cost of all that lighting is just not matching up to what you can get essentially for leafy greens. You know, there was a huge amount of infrastructure that needed to go in, but we've seen quite a few ancillary technologies cropping up now. There's, you know, more efficient lighting technology, or there's companies like one in our portfolio, Intelligent Growth Solutions, that actually does plug and play grow systems. So they're not going to get into the business of being a farmer, but they're going to provide you the technology.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's great about that, is you're not having to have all those many expertise, which traditional farmers are. You know, they have to do crop marketing, they have to do all of, you know, everything else that's involved, not just growing the plant. So I think that's really an interesting shift that's happened in vertical farming. So yeah, last year in farm tech, it was the second biggest category of for investment after ag biotech. As we saw some of those players mature. And there's also, what's really exciting about vertical farming is there's lots of different business models that are coming out. So you have those big plant factories like AeroFarms and Plenty that you mentioned, and obviously there's a bunch of those in Japan, but you've also got these distributed models like in-farm or freight farms, where they're deploying growing cabinets inside to a retailer or at universities in the case of freight farms. And those, you know, I think people are a bit skeptical about those, but they seem to be getting some traction. So I think that's a sign of a space that's maturing and is becoming, you know, a force to be reckoned with potentially.
And what I think is super exciting too, like you said, there's this whole like ecosystem of innovation to enable these new, you know, opportunities in a space. So you talked about the plug and play, like software and data systems and lighting systems that can enable vertical farming. But I also get excited about like the crops we can grow in these types of systems, and like the breeding programs that could be catalyzed for indoor growing. So we move beyond herbs and leafy greens to, you know, I don't know, like all kinds of things that are bringing nutrition, you know, closer to people. So I think marrying these trends that we're seeing in like ag biotech, you know, and farm tech and indoor growing and things like this can all come to some new exciting collaboration.
Definitely. Yeah, it's so cool. There's this collective, and I can't remember what it's called, but it involves AeroFarms. I think it involves Benson Hill Biosystems, and it's looking at gene editing for indoor crops specifically.
Oh, super cool. I'll have to check that out.
Yes, I know some groups from Japan as well. Yeah, great. And as soon as we can kind of diversify that crop type that's being grown indoors, you know, really becomes something exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's what's happened for like our commodity crops, right? Is kind of like, you know, for the green revolution, it was like, how do we optimize the right crop and the right conditions to grow outdoors, right? And now I think we can start to look at, for indoor growing, again, new crops, breeding programs, et cetera. So I definitely want to check out that Benson Hill and AeroFarms collaboration. So pivoting a little bit, I would, you know, we're getting a lot of questions in from the audience, but I do want to ask about, because we've mentioned the hype, you know, stream that comes with startups and like this kind of like ebb and flow we've been seeing in farm tech. But, you know, we've seen some overvaluations. We've seen a lot of interest that hasn't like panned out. Are you convinced right now about like where, and have investors become educated about this space in a way that gives you more confidence that this is like working?
I think, you know, we've got a great set of dedicated investors in this space, and they certainly are educated and are making very smart bets. I think, you know, I speak to a lot of the leading players, and they think that some valuations are completely bananas. But, you know, when newcomers come to this space, it's hard. I mean, I've been reporting on this now for 7 years, and I still have so much to learn. There's so much I don't know about agriculture. There's so much I don't know about growing systems. There's so much I don't know about the food industry. So it's very incredibly complex as a supply chain, as a primary industry. And so for newcomers coming to the space, you know, that is a challenge. And I think there, you know, is a lot of hype around certain areas. I think alternative protein space definitely has some peaky valuations and probably will continue to do so. When it comes to COVID, I'm hearing about deals being done at pre-COVID valuations, post-COVID valuations. I'm hearing about startups that are deciding to just raise a tranche of around, hoping to be, bridge round, basically a lot of bridge rounds happening so they can come back and hopefully get the valuations or closer to valuations they wanted before. But there are investors that are saying, I am actually investing at pre-COVID valuations because I think these businesses are solid. So I think it's, again, the diversity of this space, the different types of technologies you have ag biotech, then you have digital, then you have novel farming systems, and you have alternative proteins. I think it's so diverse that within each of those niches, there's probably a kind of valuation game going on. But it seems to be a real broad mix. It's something I've been asking a lot of investors at the moment.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, my Wi-Fi keeps cutting out, but I got the gist of all of that. And I'm so sorry, oh my gosh, technology. But you talked about alternative proteins. So can you give us a snapshot of what's happening there? I see a lot happening in Asia at the moment, which is interesting. Also because AgFunder is building out a big presence in Singapore. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what kind of hotspots you're seeing in different parts of the world, what's happening with alternative proteins in Asia, what's happening in South America, what's happening in places like India and China. Can you give us a little global perspective on trends that you're seeing and what's hot right now?
Particularly in alternative proteins or just across?
No, just in general. Yeah, because I'm seeing alternative proteins being big in the Singapore, Asia market, along with urban farming because of this 30 by 30 initiative in Singapore. But are you seeing similar type of interest in other parts of the world? And then if not, what are the kind of big trends happening in different spaces? Yeah,
I mean, it's really interesting because there's definitely global trends. I think a lot is born here in the US, but the kind of speed at which it's now being exported to other parts of the world is definitely growing. So there's other categories within the farm tech report, for instance, that we're seeing cropping up all over the world, which is agribusiness marketplaces. That's where growers can purchase inputs or sell their grain. They can trade amongst each other potentially with used equipment. There are some big agribusiness marketplaces in Latin America, for instance. There's Agrify in Argentina. There's Orbia out, which has been set up by Bayer in Brazil, but also in Asia, there's various different agribusiness marketplaces. And I think a lot of that is going to be accelerated due to COVID and enabling people to get to market because they've been unable to get to market through, lockdown. I saw someone asking about Africa. We actually invested in an agribusiness marketplace in Africa called WeFarm. They started out as a farmer to farmer networking tool and information portal, and are now pivoting to actually be able to enable farmers to get access to inputs that they would otherwise struggle to get access to quality inputs. But what they've discovered during COVID is that they've had to become a bit of a logistics company as well and fill in for some of that kind of transportation of products, not just necessarily be the platform to find and purchase. So what I find is interesting and kind of in terms of global trends can be quite similar. It's the implementation of those technologies in the different markets that will become different. So in Africa, you need to be a bit more of a one-stop shop. You may need to provide a bit of, maybe a bit of fintech, provide some credit to farmers to be able to purchase your technology, whatever it is. Similarly, in India, it's a little bit more involved because, again, also you have a lot of smallholder farmers. So it's a very different farmer profile to what you have in the US. But I think overall, the trends are quite similar.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And so some advice, maybe just your perspective that you would have for entrepreneurs who are setting up a marketplace, for example, if you're, the reason I'm asking this is because I just had lunch with someone from big major foundation that's affiliated with one of the big agribusinesses. And we were talking about, in Africa specifically, how you could get more startups collaborating to deliver more value to growers and more information, for example. to help, you know, kind of create this one-stop shop value creation. So if I'm a grower and I want pest management advice, I want disease management advice, I want marketplace advice, you know, and machinery advice, like all in one place. How do you actually, like as an entrepreneur, get that? Because it's unlikely one company is going to do everything, but you need to aggregate from a number of different sources. And so, you know, how is that working? And are there good models that you know of?
Yeah, I don't know of any models like that, actually.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting.
Sounds like
We were
you're
just
on something.
Yeah, we were just talking about how to foster more like B2B collaboration, you know, like at that like initial level that could in turn deliver more value to the growers. But it's complicated because everybody's trying to sell at this juncture their solution
Yes.
directly to growers. And, you know, that's a hard sell in almost every market because nobody wants to pay unless there's like a clear and tangible return on investment, which sometimes information doesn't give you right away. So yeah.
Right. Right.
It's a
Yeah, no, that's a great concept, but yeah, I haven't really heard of anyone doing that.
Yeah. So right now the marketplaces are kind of like focused on, like you said, the machinery, the commodity, the seed, the input kind of side of things. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So, and another kind of like observation that I have, and I just want to test if this is true, is so like we talked about a second ago, the Singapore government has the 30 by 30 initiative. My understanding is that so they want to be 30% food secure by 2030. AgFunder is playing a key role in helping to achieve this goal. And I understand there's kind of 3 areas of priority, which are urban farming, aquaculture, and alternative proteins. So we're seeing a lot of like coverage and investment interest in these spaces in Southeast Asia and particularly like in Singapore. I've seen like a plethora of like precision ag companies and marketplaces in Latin America, but are you seeing like the alternative protein interest in Latin America? Like you're seeing in Asia? Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it's definitely not the same scope. So there's a big company in South America called Notco,
Okay.
and they have raised quite a significant amount of funding. I can't remember, but it is a smaller industry. It's not to say it won't grow, but
Right.
Asia has done a lot more there. And then for the vertical farming, we wrote about a company called Agro Urbana down in South America. I think it was their first vertical farming startup there. But yeah, and it's interesting because you'd think, you know, a place like Latin America is plentiful in land, plentiful in various different crops, exports to, you know, the rest of the world. So why would they necessarily need urban farming or vertical farming? But they still do have the same challenges that we have in other parts of the world where urbanized communities can't necessarily get access to good local fresh food. So I think, you know, you will start to see more of it there, but it's, yeah, actually, it's interesting. Now you've said that, like Asia is more of leads Latin America in those specific spaces.
Yeah, in that space. And then like interestingly too, like in China, I've been following some of the developments there. They're super like, of course, focused on their domestic market and their like, domestic ecosystem of startups, but definitely like I'm seeing a lot of plays and alternative proteins and marketplaces there. And that's also kind of like showing the rest of Asia a little bit of like new types of business models and, you know, the kind of like, even the food delivery and things, but that's of course taking it away from farm tech, but you know, you're seeing these like kind of emerging more and more because they're connecting growth directly with consumers.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, we would still class some of those as farm tech if the farmers, you know, using this tool. And what's interesting, so again, coming back to that idea of the different implementation models in different markets. In China, there's doing a lot of this kind of group buying. So you have in your communities, you become like a group buyer for certain groceries, for instance, which will link you up with local growers. And that's something we haven't seen in other markets, and is really interesting and could be something that could be exported to other parts of Asia, again, where you have quite a few smallholder farmers, but also much more disconnected communities, you know, digitally.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fascinated to see like the uptake of WhatsApp in those types of situations. Like growers are selling directly to consumers in this like Groupon style model. We actually have a team in our finalist cohort this year in our TFF Challenge finalist cohort, and they're doing something that's actually actually connecting, you know, producers to food truck sellers, like food cart holders, but in this Groupon model. But WhatsApp has been their platform of choice. And we even had like some mentors say to them, don't you need to build like a sophisticated, you know, platform to do this? And they said, no, WhatsApp works perfectly. And that's been really interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, why, if it's something's out there that can do it for you, there's no need to build everything. And I think that's actually an interesting kind of comment overall about farm tech and agri-food tech. A lot of the early entrepreneurs were coming from other industries, whether they were building all this, you know, deep, incredible tech. But, you know, a lot of the challenges that are being faced by farmers and consumers are quite simple and don't necessarily need crazy, massive innovation to solve them. That's less exciting for entrepreneurs. It's probably a little bit less venture backable, maybe. But it's interesting that, you know, some more simplistic business models, it could be, could make just as much of an impact as, you know, deep innovation.
Well, exactly. I think that that's like something too, when we talk about like educating investors, sometimes the transformation can come first from the simple, you know, kind of just giving these types of opportunities to growers and then enabling them to take on the biotech solution or the, you know, machinery based solution, etc. But just going back to what I was like talking about a moment ago about the need for like kind of B2B collaboration, I just want to like give another example here besides the whole like precision ag data space, but it's also in the hardware space. So we're seeing like, and it's covered in your report too, like a plethora of drone companies and hyperspectral sensors and IoT and all of this, you know, coming to the fore. And again, having a piece of the puzzle for value creation for growers. How do you see the future of this developing? Like, is this going to be something where you feel like there will be a lot of standalone companies, or do you see like integration happening, you know, that will be kind of a, you know, future for companies?
Yeah. So again, kind of thinking about kind of the one-stop shop. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about consolidation in that digital ag space. You know, in the beginning, you'd have these sensors that you're going to save the world with this moisture sensor. And a lot of those companies were struggling to get distribution, struggling to actually get into the hands of farmers. So they started to partner with other groups and to start, I think some of these tools are being bundled together and packaged up. We haven't actually seen as many of the consolidation acquisitions as I think everyone imagined there would be. It was a big talking point, I remember back in 2015, 2016, and hasn't really come to light. But I think we have seen a lot of partnerships. And that's not just in the digital space, but that's you know, in the biotech space a bit as well. And again, it's where, you know, my technology is compatible with your technology. We have a much bigger value proposition and much easier for a farmer if he can have an already integrated software with a sensor. So there's definitely quite a bit of that going on. And I think partnerships is a trend that we'll continue to see.
That's super exciting. I mean, that's music to our ears at TFF, but how are those partnerships happening? Is that like encouraged by the investor? Is that encouraged by the farmer, by the food company, for example? Or how, like, are you seeing any trends of like coming to fruition? Or?
I'm not really. I think it's probably a mixture of all the above. Thinking about a partnership, and this isn't the digital space, but it's in biotech, but between Pivot Bio, who has those has their microbes that can help with nitrogen fixation, and another company called 3 Bar Biologics, which has and I hope I get the description right, and I'm sorry if I get it wrong, but it's kind of like a storage tank, I guess, is a simplified way of saying it, for the microbes. So microbes are obviously very, very volatile, and they are living organisms, so they need to be kept alive. So getting them to the farm and getting to the point where they can actually be applied on the farm, I think has been a struggle for a lot in the microbial space. So what's interesting is that 3 Bar Biologics has a technology, and I don't think I know exactly what it is, but that can help to stabilize them until the right point for application. So that's a really interesting partnership there. And it's actually helping the implementation and making life easier for the farmer.
Very, very cool. And I think, yeah, exactly. These types of collaborations and partnerships need to be happening more. I love Pivot, by the way. They're like so interesting. Microbes, do you classify microbes in ag biotech, or are they their own category actually?
They're in ag biotech. So our ag biotech is very broad. Yeah. Okay. So it's microbes, biologicals, and it has the gene editing side of things, but it's anything that's kind of biology, chemistry.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yep.
Because we're definitely like very entrenched in the synthetic biology world here at TFF, and so much, exciting kind of fermentation based solutions, micro based solutions, coming both in food tech and ag tech. So that's really fascinating to see. And I wonder if we're at a new moment in time about public acceptance of GMOs and certainly investor acceptance of GMOs. Do you think that there's like a shift coming, and because it's now about gene editing and about synbio versus just the genetics, or?
I mean, I think there's still education to go into it. So we did a really interesting article the other day. My colleague Lauren, who is a regenerative rancher herself, there's a company that's doing gene editing, and they're doing it with a cover crop. I can't remember which one it is. I think it's camelina. And they were saying this is actually, can be compatible with regenerative agriculture. So our article said, biotech should be used by regenerative agriculture. And we asked people to respond to it. And we've had a lot of people responding saying, no, regenerative agriculture is, should not have any kind of genetic manipulation involved. And then people responding saying, well, actually gene editing is a form of advanced breeding. It's actually what would happen over many generations, just in a shorter time frame. But what it kind of spoke to me was interesting is that people are open to it. More and more people are open to the idea that these tools can be used. And especially if they're going to help scale a beneficial practice like regenerative agriculture, which has the promise to potentially sequester carbon to build soil and produce more nutritious food. But there's always going to be the purist side who, have been burned by some, of their ideas about big corporations and things. So I think there's still a lot of education. I think when we're in this space, there's a general understanding, or not general understanding, that's the wrong word, a general acceptance and kind of hope that some of these tools are more accepted, because we believe in the science and we do believe that it is this form of advanced breeding. But there are people who are saying, well, it's still genetic modification. It's still genetic manipulation that doesn't sound natural. It's been used in the wrong way before and has had damaging impacts. How is it not going to be used in the wrong way again? Fools like me will say, well, I think some of these startups can self-regulate, but maybe I'm naive.
No,
people say I'm naive for that.
I have the same exact perception, but we have such interesting discussions in our community, of next gen innovators about this very topic, because they definitely are seeing like nuance between the black and white poles of like, you can't have biotech and organic mixed, but I think it's what you said, we're seeing a lot of acceptance for is like, if biotech is used for, consumer benefit or for, environmental benefit like regenerative ag, there can be a broader public acceptance around this. If we're using it with the traditional business models of trying to sell more chemicals or to lock in, IP or something like this, then I think there, people have in our community a lot of concern about this, but we're having new types of conversations, which is like, how do we use all of the tools in our toolbox to achieve better outcomes for the world, like mitigating climate change, regenerating soils, protecting biodiversity, etc. And again, but one of the companies that's profiled in your report is Inari Ag in the biotech space, but I think it's super interesting to see like the genetic diversity that's available like within crop species that we can now unleash in commercially relevant varieties through these types of advanced breeding tools. So it's like, for me, biotech is like, I don't think it's naive at all. It's like startups can change the whole game of this and the whole narrative here to lead us to more benefits for people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you're just very hopeful. And a lot of the entrepreneurs I know seem very responsible and do seem to have that mission in mind. Things can go wrong along the way. So I guess it's about how we can not police the industry. It sounds a bit dramatic, but hold them accountable. But I think it's possible, and I think people should be more positive than maybe some of them are.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like the whole like regulation side of ag biotech too makes it a specifically complicated sector to, just kind of like jump in randomly into, and also to develop business models around, because when you're looking at these like investment cases and time horizons to bring a biotech product to market in the traditional sense, like a GMO, it's like 15 years and, multi-million dollars of investment. So that's why then the stringent IP comes in, and then you have like startups can't do that. And so, it becomes like a little bit of a different conversation. But if we continue to equip nimble, purpose-driven startups to be able to do this and deliver good into the world using technology that's based on, biology, I think there's some exciting frontiers to unlock. And there's another whole area I want to get into, which is regenerative ag. And, there's no clear definition of what this is, but we are seeing investors specifically saying we want to invest in this space. So tell me more like what you're seeing the potential for farm tech in the regenerative ag space and what excites you the most.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we were kind of considering doing a webinar on this exact topic, actually, because a lot of, I first learned about regenerative agriculture back in that first agriculture reporting job I had in 2013. And it was definitely a more kind of romantic notion. I remember talking about technologies and tools, and it was all, that wasn't sort of something that was really in the wheelhouse. But now I think there are, increasing numbers of technology that could be relevant there. But I'm just not sure what the sort of overall industry is thinking about that. I think it's quite piecemeal. I think, as you said, regenerative agriculture can be defined in many different ways. And it's so different from region to region, country to country, how it's being deployed and where the benefits can be seen. So the biotech side, this is something out for debate. Other types of technologies, I'm sure, can only help. So there's a company called Pasture Map that you probably know, Christine Sue, and she just had a company acquired by a new investor called Soilworks, and they're very specifically focused on regenerative agriculture. And that's the first time I've seen a new investor with that mandate to specifically promote regenerative agriculture from a technology standpoint. So it's very exciting to see them come to the space. And Pasture Map is a software as a service. They help cattle ranchers to manage their holistic grazing practices. So, but that's the first investor that I've seen focusing purely on that. There's quite a few regenerative agriculture farmland funds. They purchase degraded farmland and apply regenerative principles to regenerate that. And they've been around for a few years now. But on the technology side, I think it's a slightly new frontier.
Yeah. Okay, the Q&A is blowing up. I'm so glad I like made my screen bigger and I just saw like all of these questions. So I want to get to these. And I'm sorry, like just to the audience that I had those technical difficulties. It's definitely like changed my flow a little bit. So thank you for bearing with us for that and putting up with the kind of like jumpiness in the conversation. But Louisa, you are just like giving us so many like companies to watch and great like pieces of information. So appreciative to have you here. So I'm going to go through some of these questions now. And again, they're not in any like cohesive order. I'm just taking them as they are in the Q&A. But James Freeman is asking, is it fair to say that the toughest solution space is the messy middle of the ag tech supply chain, where linking the flow of information between parties where there may historically be mistrust is difficult? Do you see growth in the space, and will that come spurred by ESG program goals by major agri-food producers or from grassroots efforts between supply chain participants? Big question.
Yeah. It's a big question.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so the messy middle is the messy middle. We categorize it as midstream tech because was actually quite which is but it's this combination of so many different technologies. At some point we're going to have to split that out and be more specific about what's involved there. But yeah, I mean, it is incredibly difficult. And again, different ag sectors, different markets, it all looks very different. And I'm sure, Christine, you have a huge amount of insight on supply chains there. But it's exciting because there is more investment going into that space. And there are people, supply chains are shortening, whether it's, me buying from an online farm to consumer platform, or it's consumers, asking where their food is coming from. Supply chains are shortening, and I think that's good news, and that's great momentum for some of the innovation in this space. And I'm just looking at the rest of that question.
Well, yeah. Do you think like
It's trust. Well, yes, trying to create more transparency, within that supply chain, that is definitely challenging. And it's interesting. I remember in the early days of some of the supply chain technologies, which were looking at reducing food spoilage in the supply chain. And some people have come up with these, awesome little sensors that could be placed in the pallet of apples or wherever, and can travel through the supply chain and can measure moisture levels, humidity, and so on to see how that food might get spoiled and how it's going to last. But there were many different people within that chain that would need to ensure that that little sensor was still there. And that need for getting multiple players on board with something was a challenge. So I think technologies need to rely less on that behavior change within the supply chain to become something that's going to be scalable and usable. Because I think it works to the benefit of many in the supply chain, not for everyone not to have that information. They're used to writing on pads of paper and leaving a load somewhere with a note on a pad of paper, and then it goes to the next trucker and so on. So I think that's what's going to be really interesting there is how those technologies manage to reduce that need for behavior change.
Yeah, I think that's very, very interesting. And I think also this kind of like the vested interest, for various players in the supply chain too is like really important to consider too. So indeed, like overcoming this mistrust is quite complicated, I guess. And, just like on a very, very simplistic level, the middleman, that exists in emerging economies, right, between the grower and the buyer. It's really interesting. We're working with a very early stage startup that's actually working on kind of providing, they're not eliminating the middleman, they're increasing transparency about the middleman's behaviors through like an Uber style ranking, so that both sides, both the buyer and a seller, can like rank the middleman and their honesty and integrity in their job. So it's a play there to like increase trust and transparency without the elimination of the vested interest of the middleman, who in other places is being completely, disrupted.
Eliminated. Yeah, it's interesting. And there's a parallel there with agribusiness marketplaces and the role of the retailer. Exactly. Some of them have been trying to completely cut out the retailer, and others are trying to work with the retailer.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that's super interesting to see is there's not a one size fits all solution. It can also be very like contextual to the locality where you are, the region where you are, et cetera. And so that's why it's exciting to see this plethora of innovations emerge that are like trying out different and, experimenting different types of systems that indeed like are either eliminating or empowering, different players across the supply chain. But I really like the point you said too about the behavior change aspect. Like, how do you make that super simple for people to adopt? So it's not like convincing them, it becomes like a valuable thing for them to do, to move away from the pad of paper to, whatever the enabling technology might be. So great question, James. Lots to discuss there. I'm going to move to Anne DeWanto, who said, thanks for such an interesting talk. I'm from Indonesia. Is there any plan for AgFunder to accommodate Indonesian farmers?
Oh, right. I'm not I'm not sure what you mean by accommodate them, but we have a reporter based in Singapore, and he has been doing some reporting from the whole ASEAN region. Indonesia is one of the most active countries in ASEAN for innovation. It's fantastic. So we're seeing a lot more technologies being developed there. So absolutely, we're hoping to spread the word on those and help educate you all.
So much happening in Indonesia right now. So definitely like email us and email AgFunder, but I definitely see that as like a country to watch on farm tech. And we're seeing so many exciting like early stage startups, which is always a good signal, right? For how investment is going to happen. Zachary asked, this may be a bit outside of the scope of ad tech trends, but has embracing the circular economy been seen in the food system and upcoming global trends?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Circular economy is this term that's been around for a while now, but it's it's been quite kind of piecemeal in terms of how it's deployed. The main way that I see it in being done is with urban agriculture and through vertical farming. So building farms on top of building farms on top of buildings, building tiles on top of buildings, but utilizing some of the heat generated from those buildings, recycling some of the water through the different systems. So I think that's really interesting. That's kind of the main way that I'm seeing circular economy.
Yeah. And Zachary, like, definitely get in touch with TFF. We ran a circular economy of food challenge this year in partnership with Danone and Google. And actually the winner of that challenge, Fabricio, I see, is on the call today. But basically, what was really interesting, like his solution in Brazil was focused on repurposing banana peel waste, but also what made their product or their startup very circular too, is they were training their banana farmers in agroforestry practices that would not only like help them to farm more sustainably, but also provide a premium in the market for their bananas and this new market opportunity for the banana peels, which they've converted into banana ketchup, which I really want to try. Apparently it's absolutely delicious and tastes like tomato. Yeah. But I do think like circular economy is one of those things, like at least in the like more impact side, the less of the VC side, we're hearing so many people talking about it, and also the big companies, right? Like the food companies that are vertically integrating and looking to like the growers that they're sourcing from. It's becoming, kind of the new word for sustainability. It's like, are you circular economy? And regenerative, of course, and resilient are the new words, like replacing sustainability that we're seeing in the impact investment space. Yeah. Do you think VCs care about those types of words, by the way, Louisa? Still, yeah. Do you think
I think it might still feel a bit fluffy around the edges, but actually the way you've just described it, it seems less so, and obviously it's good market, good business sense. Yeah, for the long term, I think. Well, time will tell, but I think in this like build back better post-COVID recovery scenario, a few trends that I've been seeing, which I'd love for you to comment on, is like food safety front and center, food quality front and center. People are talking less about sustainability, but they're looking at localizing production, and kind of national food security is again coming back to this discourse, which means localizing supply chains, which actually is also proving to be a boon for more sustainable practices. And I just wonder, like, those trends are something you're also seeing? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that local food systems, my kind of concern or wonder is what happens when, I don't know if things are getting back to normal, I suppose, but are those lasting changes, that sort of support for local food systems, and how kind of scalable can that be? And is it only just certain localities are going to be able to serve their communities? But I mean, I love those trends are coming through. I think it's very positive. And what we've seen, and again, this is like very hyper focused on Southeast Asia right now, which I know is like a big interest for AgFunder and also for TFF at the moment. But like what we've seen too is it's been great to see the investment happening into farm tech, like being the proof of concept happening in other markets. But then we're seeing countries replicating those business models and tech, like in their localities, right? So they're securing national food security by creating marketplaces that, got multi-million-dollar investments in the US or in Brazil, but they're saying, let's bring this concept to Indonesia or, to the Philippines. And because it's garnered that traction in other parts of the world, they're having an easier time getting, investments in their markets, which is, cool to see. Absolutely. Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, Edson Barbosa is asking about education regarding new food technology, alternative proteins. Do you know if universities in the world or even online courses are offering courses in plant-based fermentation and cultivated meat? I'm from Brazil and things here are slowing down in this area. Oh, interesting. I mean, a great resource to find out would be the Good Food Institute. They fantastic nonprofit, focus on this space. They have offices all over the world now. I actually don't think they do have anything in South America yet. But they would certainly be able to point you towards any online courses that might be out there. I would hope there would be some.
Oh, for sure. I think absolutely. New Harvest Initiative comes to mind.
Yep.
And Good Food Institute, both like kind of leaders in the cell ag space. And yeah, ping us on email because I can connect you with a couple of people in Brazil working in that sector too. This is a great question from Abhinav, is what do you think is the future of cold storage and post-harvest logistics, especially in developing countries?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, again, that's been, something we've seen innovation in for a few years. It's been that deployment challenge. It's been that affordability challenge. So interestingly, again, you're coming back to this idea of business models. It's like, how do you get those systems into local areas in developing countries? I think you need to have some kind of innovative business model. You need to find a way to bring communities together to be able to afford to lease or to purchase that equipment. So I think that's where you need to focus the time, is on finding a way to get that deployed, because the technology is there. It's just how you can actually get it on the ground.
Yeah. Okay, I have two more questions. One is very entrepreneurship focused, because at TFF, we're here to empower the next generation of entrepreneurs. I found it super interesting in your report about how entrepreneurs should talk in the context of COVID. Some VC experts have said that startups should really mention how they're adapting to COVID-19 and pivoting and doing all it takes to get through. So I just wondered if you could recommend any language that startups currently seeking investment can use to their advantage, especially at times when they're suffering financially and with their market. But like, what are VCs looking to see right now about how they're getting through COVID?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's about being nimble. So proving that you've been able to adapt to the changing environment. I think, with funding is going to be a struggle for the next few months. So however much you can continue to iterate on your business model, try and create some revenues or get some test results, anything you could do to continue the business in a kind of bootstrapped way so that you just look a lot stronger when you next go to raise funding. If you're able to delay that funding, I might potentially recommend that, at least for now, again, until you kind of build a bit more of a robust business. But, I think if you're still going and if your technology still answers the problem and still answers a need now and is not just a nice to have from pre-COVID world, if it's, kind of an essential or a need to have in today's environment, then you should be in a good position.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeing new investment bodies moving into this space in the post-COVID world, or is it just like the same people investing but putting more?
Yes, it's really interesting. We actually reopened our third fund on the investment side because we had people reaching out and they were interested. They were seeing what was happening in the food industry. They were seeing how, resilient as some supply chains were, there was a lot of disruption. And also looking at the links between human health and diet and complications from COVID. A lot of people, a lot of investors came through and said, actually, we want to invest in this space. Do you have anything open for us? So we reopened our third fund. It's been doing incredibly well. We'll be announcing a final close in a few weeks, but, it's been amazing what kind of interest, and a lot of those have been new investors.
Yes, very cool. And so I just want to end because we're at the hour, but I could literally go on for two more. But I want to end with, what are you most excited about when we think about our future food system? Is there anything that really is inspiring you and keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I know. I mean, people often ask me one of my favorite categories, and I always feel like it's like choosing between your children, because I think all the categories are really exciting and super relevant. But I do think genuinely think there are amazing things being done in all of them, even in the food delivery space, which used to kind of slightly bore me. But I think now look at how important it is, and look at all the enabling technologies that are cropping up around, like ghost kitchens and things like that. But where I think there's a real priority, and I think it's very prescient in these times, is ensuring that nutritious food is reaching all people. And there's a lot of different innovations that can help do that. So whether that's bolstering those local supply chains that we were talking about before, enabling healthy food to be grown anywhere. So that could be vertical farming, but also these marketplaces linking local farms to local stores. You'd be amazed how much that decentralization, forces food to degrade before it reaches consumers. But then there's also those biotech tools. Gene editing can help to breed more nutritionally enhanced varieties. There's artificial intelligence that's doing research. We have a company called Brightseed that really researching which crops can have bioactives and healthy compounds within them to help fight things like diabetes. So, and then, using fewer damaging inputs and chemicals in the growth of food. So I think that kind of food as medicine and enabling people to eat more nutritious food is what I'm really excited about.
We heard a great quote yesterday from one of our panelists, and she said, medicine is sick care, food is health care. And I think that that's like, indeed, like how we have to look at this is like food is medicine, and securing nutritious food to people in all of those ways that you described will be like a huge lever we have to solve every global challenge we face, COVID or not.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's
Absolutely.
really like the biggest lever. So that's super exciting. Thank you everyone for joining today. Please do connect with us. We're happy to pass on more questions to Louisa and continue this discussion. I really do hope we'll have a second session like in the fall after your next report comes out. And in the meantime, do go check AgFunder's site. You can download the report. They really are, the industry place to go for all of the news. So make sure you follow Louisa on social media and AgFunder for all of the updates. Again, thank you for your time. And Louisa, people are asking for your socials. I don't know if you want to like type that in really quickly.
Yeah, I'll type that in. Yeah.
And
great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And again, sorry for the technical difficulties.
We got there in the end.
Yeah, we got there, exactly. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Okay. Have a wonderful day.
Bye. Thank you.